technology. But prior to that, prior to 200 years, let's times that by 4, when the Islamic world led in science and technology for 800 years. For 800 years. And perhaps we lost that lead. Perhaps we lost that leadership role because we were not grateful to the ni'mah, to the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, giving us all this hidayah, this guidance, this knowledge of all this different science and technology. Okay, because it's a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we look at Surah Al-Anbiya, and we look at Surah Al-Saba, ayah 10 to 11, and Surah Al-Anbiya, ayah 80, we look at the fact that Dawud alayhi salam was given iron, he was given armor for warfare, he was given this technology. Okay, we made Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says we made iron soft for him. Okay, and he was able to make this technology, these coats, these chain link coats of armor, and he was able to advance in this. Okay. And so why did he do this? So that he could be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. He said, are you not grateful? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks, after he's bestowed all this upon his messenger, he asks him, are you not grateful? Are you not grateful? So if we separate our hearts and our minds away from each other, if we separate our iman from how we view the world, this is basically an internal colonization. If we look at one of the purposes of colonization, as we discussed before, was to divide and conquer, was to separate the ummah into different pieces so that it would become weaker and easier, able to split amongst the different European powers, and so they could rule over these different lands in a much easier way. And today we see many of that happening in different ways and forms, divide and conquer, division. Whereas the ummah, like even today, like if you look at the approach that many Muslims have, some Muslims, they'll only care about certain issues. So they'll only care about, say, okay, what's happening to black people. Certain Muslims will only care about what's happening to Palestinians. Certain Muslims will only care about what is happening to the Uyghur, the Muslims in China. Some will only care about the Kashmiri. Someone will only care about the Iraqis. Someone will only care about the Somalis. You'll only care about that certain group, certain individual, but that's not an iman-based perspective. To compartmentalize, to section yourself. So internally, if you start to compartmentalize yourself, and internally you start to divide yourself, okay? So you separate your iman from your senses, then you actually don't get the full benefit of your senses. So if the secular person says, no, you got to take God out of the way you view the world, of how you view and you study the world, okay, you're actually looking at the world in a more restricted way. You're looking at a world not completely. You don't understand the complexity. You're actually looking at it from a tunnel vision, actually. That's why, like Rubay bin Amr, one of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, who engaged with Rostam, one of the Persian leaders. So during the Khilafah of Umar bin al-Khattab, he sent Syed ibn Abi Waqqas and the Sahaba to take over these Persian lands. And so when Rubay ibn Amr was like negotiating with Rostam, the leader of the Persians, he says, we have been sent here to take you from the constriction of this dunya, okay, to the vastness of this dunya and the akhirah. Islam is supposed to give you a more comprehensive view so that you're actually truly be able to utilize your senses to the full extent. You are truly able to appreciate history. You are truly able to appreciate current events and be able to look at it in a different way. That's why when Hudayf bin al-Yaman radiallahu anhu is asking Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam about the evil, he's asking about it so that I can look at it from an Islamic lens. Not for trivial purposes, not for salacious purposes. oh wow, like this is like a horror story, or like, you know, a lot of times people want to sit around a campfire and tell jinn stories. Why do they want to hear jinn stories? You know, why do they want to hear, or why do people want to hear like the signs of the hour? It's more for like the fear factor. Okay, it's more just you know, to get the adrenaline going for this tale, for the entertainment purpose. Oh, you know, this you know, this you know, this is why people watch maybe like scary movies and horror movies and things like that, right? So for that type of purpose. But the reason we know about the jinn, the reason why Hudayfa bin al-Yaman is asking about the evil that will come and how to deal with that evil is so exactly so that how we can deal with it from an iman-based perspective. That's the reason why he's asking about it. Okay, after this period of evil, you know, will we have a period of good? Okay, yes, this period of good, it's going to have a defect in it. That means it won't be perfect. And I remember talking to one of my shuyukh, and I was he was explaining this hadith to me, and we were talking about current events. And he mentioned, like, you know, a lot of times people, they get depressed because they look at their current situation, for example, like avoiding interest. It's very difficult to avoid interest completely, or to avoid a lot of things that are clearly haram within the Quran and the Sunnah. Okay, it's sometimes for many Muslims, it's very demotivating. Like, you know, it's hard to come to terms that we have all this that we're told in the Quran, the Sunnah, halal and haram, and then our lifestyles is sometimes so contradictory. How do we come to terms with that? He said, SubhanAllah, look at the guidance of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. A time of good will come, but it'll have a defect in it. There'll be defects. So it won't, we won't get back like that time. That's why the generation of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum was so perfect and so beautiful. And that, you know, if we are going to, the things that will misguide us, it are going to be people who could even be from our own culture, our own nation, because our Rasul said they'll look like us. Okay, they'll be from our progeny. Okay, so they can be from the same nation, they can be from the same family. But the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying that you need to hold on, because why are they misguided? Is because they left the tradition of the Quran, the Sunnah, and the way of the Sahaba radiallahu anhu. And you need to stick to a jama'ah that holds on to that. And if you can't find that jama'ah, then avoid, you know, everyone. Stay away from this fitna. Okay, avoid all these different you know, types of sects and so forth. Okay, so if we look at the colonial objective, which is to weaken the Muslims, we know that there was specific planning to weaken the Muslims. Today, what is happening to the minds of the Muslims? Are our minds strong minds? Are we looking at things through an Islamic perspective? Okay, or are we looking at things from a way that other people want us to view historical events? Okay, so for example, when we look at history, there'll be a big criticism on Islamic empires and how they took over many lands. There'll be a big criticism about that. Oh, look at how the Islamic Empire, Ottoman Empire, all these different empires, they took over different lands. But that same level of criticism won't be levied on other world powers. So as if Islam was the exception, Islamic empires were the exception. And then you have, you know, many people almost having to always explain themselves and have this guilt-ridden conscience, and we have to be we have to explain our deen, we have to explain our history, we have to explain how we look, we have to explain our value. We have to always be explaining that. Why? Because we allow ourselves to be put in that position because of the weakness of our iman. If we have strong iman and we have critical thinking, then we understand that the world has always worked like that, including to this day. Including to this day, this is how the world works, is that empires are either expanding or they're contracting. And if they're not expanding, if they're on the direction of contraction, they're on the direction of extinction. Okay, and if they're expanding, then they are preserving their society, and they're you know, solidifying their place in the future. Okay, so they're giving themselves a future by the expansion of their empire. So if we look at the Persian Empire, it survived by expansion. When it no longer expanded, contraction, then you saw that it come to an end. Roman Empire, so forth. And today we see the same thing. Like, are we so naive to understand and appreciate, just because you don't have like necessarily physical wars and battles to take over lands, that people's lands aren't being taken over and people themselves aren't being exploited? Are we so naive to not understand and not see that? And if you actually read a lot of Noam Chomsky's work, he elucidates why, for example, many Western governments, specifically United States, have, and you see that also at the end of the way that the colonial powers conducted themselves, is that there was a policy now of not necessarily taking over that land, but just having the control that you want within that particular land to be able to exploit it. Okay, and that it was much more cost effective to have military bases strategically placed and have sympathetic and rulers that collaborate with you within different lands than actually occupying those lands themselves, because that is far more expensive and far more chaotic. Because when people know that they're being occupied, they're much more resistant. Okay. So are we so foolhardy to see that if you look at, there's this criticism of, say, for example, Turkey, say they criticize the Ottoman Empire. Well, Turkey does not have over 800 foreign military bases in European countries and Western countries. Okay, there's no Muslim country who has foreign bases in non-Muslim countries, predominantly Muslim majority countries. They don't have that, right? But United States, they do. France, they have foreign bases, but the United States, they outweigh everybody. Okay, Russia, they have foreign bases, but if you look at it, United States, they eclipse everyone. Over 800 foreign military bases all over the world. Okay, so let's come to terms with it. Let's understand world history properly. So as we approach the Ottoman Empire and we talk about what they accomplished, they weren't a perfect empire by no means. Remember, when we look to our example, we look at the Khulafa Rashidun, okay, as an example, those Khulafa as a guide for our deen or our values and so forth. But when we look at Islamic empires, there is a lot of good that we can actually learn from. We can actually learn and benefit from a lot of the good that they were able to accomplish. Okay, so let's talk about Uthman ibn Urtughrul. Okay, so Uthman, the one that the Ottoman Empire is named after. And why is the Ottoman Empire, okay, why is the whole empire named after this man? Why wasn't it Urtughrul? Why was Uthman, the person, one of the sons of Urtughrul, the one that the empire is named after? Because he set the tone for the success of the Ottoman Empire. He set the tone for it. Firstly, by his characteristics, by his character, and secondly, by the core values and the constitution by which they should operate. Okay, not unlike the methodology of the Sahaba radiallahu anhu, as we see the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. Those first few years in Mecca, Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam is setting the character, building the character of the Sahaba. Key core Sahaba. So we see from Mecca, this is where the Khulafa Rashidun came from, right? Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, radiallahu anhum. They're all coming from Mecca. These great characters, okay? These great Sahaba, these great examples for us to try to ascribe and try to live by. And then when they established the first Islamic city, Medina, okay, then you have the Sahifa, the constitution, the ideas, the principles of how the society should operate, and it sets the foundation of how this Islamic, seed that was planted will become one of the biggest empires in history. And to this day, we see the strong presence of Islam and Muslims. So let's look at firstly the character. So for the remaining portion of the podcast, we'll concentrate on the character of Uthman. Okay, and then we'll talk about the values that he left his son Orhan with afterwards. So what was the constitution? What was the advices? What was the nasiha that he left his son with after to build this Ottoman society? So firstly, he was known for his bravery. Okay, he would be fighting the Byzantines. So if we look at the Crusaders that he fought, he led the soldiers himself into battle. Okay, and he would be able to, one after another, be able to overcome these different Crusader armies. Okay, so they sent from Bursa, Madanus, Adranus, Qatta, Kastala. All these crusaders were, they would send different armies to fight him, and he would lead our armies himself to repel them and take over their lands. Okay, he was known to be a very wise leader. He was known for his wisdom, and he stood with Sultan al-Din, the Roman Seljuk, to help his efforts in conquering many of the Byzantine fortresses. And he was so liked by the Seljuk ruler at that time. Remember, it was the Seljuks that gave them the foothold, that gave the Ottomans the foothold. But the Ottomans, they came in favor with the Seljuk, the Romans part of the Seljuk Empire. And they respected Uthman so much that they actually put his name on their currency. And in the masajid at Jum'ah, they would have the shuyukh make a dua for him. This is how respected he was. He was known for his sincerity, his ikhlas. He was known for his steadfastness. So he conquered Qatta, Lafka, Haqq Hisar, Qawj Hisar. In 712 after Hijrah, he conquered Kabwa, Yakija, Taraqlawa, Tikrar, Bikari. And in 716 after Hijrah, he conquered Brusa, and Brusa was led by a man by the name of Araqnus. And Araqnus was a great leader, and it was a very formidable opponent. And it took many, many years for Uthman to be able to conquer this particular Byzantine city and fortress and stronghold. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he tells us in the Quran, O you who believe, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu isbiru wa sabiru wa rabitu wattaqullaha la'allakum tuflihun. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, O you who believe, endure and be more patient than your enemy and guard your territory by stationing army units and guarding, and fear Allah so that you may be successful. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the believers that you need to be patient and endure and compete with others in patience, because just because you are Muslim, just because you have Islam, does not mean that people are just going to make a way for you, that the sea is going to split for you. Even the sea, when it split for Musa alayhi salam, think about how many years he had to be patient. You understand what I'm saying? Like, we're looking for the sea just to split for us, the people just to make way for us, just for this miraculous thing to occur, and we will have victory. But sometimes, because we put in the effort, like, how much effort do you put in? A couple months, a couple years, a couple days, a couple hours? How much effort for the sake of Islam do you put in? And are you patient upon that? Do you think that it's deserving now after a few hours, after a few years? What do you think? So one of the key characteristic traits of Uthman was his love for da'wah, to calling people to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this man, as I mentioned, Aqranus, he was the emir of Brusa. So Aqranus, he was the emir of Brusa, and he was so impressed by the character of Uthman that he ended up accepting Islam, and he became like a da'iyah. He became a big proponent of Islam, and Uthman gave him the title Bek, and he was known to have this prominent role within the Ottoman state. And generally speaking, many Byzantine leaders and many people within their lands became Muslim because of their characteristic traits of Uthman and the tone that he sent, and the people generally speaking. And it's very similar. If you look at the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they were very, very few people. And for there to be such a massive influx of people coming into the fold of Islam and staying Muslim meant that they truly believed in the message. It wasn't under compulsion of force, because firstly, from an Islamic perspective, very clearly, and this is very clear, accepted, mainstream doctrine, widely held doctrine, that you cannot compel somebody to become Muslim. You can only invite them. How come there was so few Sahaba, but given the ratio of the Sahaba to how many people accepted Islam was so huge, the Sahaba did not have time, and they didn't have modern technology to be able to reach so many different people. You didn't have like a state, television broadcasting channel to reach so many people, or radio, or any of these things. People, they were so enamored by the character of the Sahaba radhiyallahu anhum. They loved their character. Like if you go, subhanAllah, you go to Turkey, go to Pakistan, go to Somalia, go to North Africa, go to Dagestan, go to India, go to any of these places where Muslims are, and the way that they talk about the Sahaba to this day, people are in love with the character of the Sahaba. If we are in love with the character of the Sahaba 1400 years removed from their life, think about how much the people loved their character. To see people like that, to see people who were so honest and brave and courageous and had this, sense of like mercy and compassion and justice, all of these different things, together. So he attracted many people with dawah, and also he was able to attract many different Muslim groups. Okay, so there was a group known by the name of Ghazyaram, okay, and they were actually stationed along the Byzantine borders by the Abbasids. Okay, so they were originally stationed there for dawah purposes. Okay, now this particular group known as Ghazyaram, the defenders, they now allied with the Ottomans, okay, to help with fighting, with helping with dawah. There was another organization known as the Alejuan the Brothers, a group of they were basically charitable people, mainly traders. So they were mainly businessmen, okay, who would trade, and they actually offered their wealth and their business services in helping with the dawah. So they would help build masajid, they would help build hotels for people to stay in. So basically, like a room, like this place where they could have some room and board, inexpensive or free. So they were basically allying with the Ottoman Empire to help them for dawah purposes. So one thing that we can see here in dawah that makes dawah far more effective is when your dawah is inclusive. When your dawah is inclusive, and that's maybe something that we can work on as well, inshallah ta'ala, with many of the Islamic organizations, is to make the dawah inclusive. Now, when I say inclusive, the extreme version of that is that you can have any aqidah, you can believe in any like a mutated form of Islam, and that's all good. Okay, we're not talking about that. We're talking about just like so many different organizations, so many different masajid, so many different Islamic schools, masajid, organizations, youth groups, and everyone is living like on their own little island. They're living on this like little island, and they think like they are the best thing for this ummah. since breaking your fast with dates. Okay, so they think that they're the only and they're the best. And the da'wah is not very inclusive. It's like, okay, we're doing our thing, and there's very little collaboration. Sometimes we do have to a certain extent, but the level that we should have when we have so many who have basically, like, we believe in La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, we have the same values, major issues, we're on the same page. Yet why aren't we so inclusive and being able to benefit from the different resources and talents that are located, or that the Ummah has within itself? Okay, so here we see that he had a love for da'wah, and that love for da'wah was very inclusive. It brought many different Islamic organizations and groups together to help within this unified front, and that made them actually, that was a very intelligent thing to do. That made them more effective in their da'wah, because not everyone can specialize. So for example, you have this group that's used to dealing with the Byzantines, you're allying with them, so now you benefit from their experience. You have this group of businessmen, maybe they know how to build things and launch business projects, they're able to benefit from them. You know what I mean? So it's very, very inclusive. It was a very good strategy and a good characteristic trait by Uthman. Another trait that he was known for was his sense of justice. And actually, his father initially made him a judicial authority in Qura Hisar. So this was around 684 after Hijrah, 1285 CE. And he made him obviously because he had this characteristic of justice. He was a just person. And during his tenure, actually, he judged in favor of a Byzantine Christian against a Turkish Muslim. Okay, and so the Byzantine Christian was, very surprised. He was taken aback by the fact that he judged in his favor. And so he said, "Why did you judge in my favor, knowing that I'm not a follower of your religion?" And so Uthman, he said, "Rather, how could I fail to judge in your favor when Allah, whom we worship, commands us?" Allah commands us in this ayah in the Quran, Surah An-Nisa, ayah 58, Allah commands you to render back your trust to those whom they are due. And when you judge between people, judge with justice. So this man was so impressed by this characteristic trait of justice, of someone being authentic and being just, that he is willing to judge against his own kin, his own tribesmen, someone from his own religion. He's able to judge against them because it stood up for justice. And again, that's the way of the Sahaba, radhiyallahu anhum. That's the way of our deen. This is the guidance that we have in the Quran. During the Khilafah of Ali bin Abi Talib, radhiyallahu anhu, Ali bin Abi Talib, he actually saw a Christian man wearing what he thought was his armor. So he went to he brought his dispute so Ali bin Abi Talib, remember, radiyallahu anhu, he's a Khalifa, he is an army. He can come and just take, this is my armor, give it to me. But he goes to Shuray, a Muslim judge, and he says, I need you to judge between me and this man. I believe he has my armor. And so he brings the two people together, this Christian man, Ali bin Abi Talib, and he asks Ali bin Abi Talib, what do you say about so he listens to what Ali says, and then he says to this Christian man, what do you say about what the Amir al-Mu'mineen says about you? Okay, and so the Christian man, he says, this is my armor, and I do not consider Amir al-Mu'mineen to be a liar, but he says this is my armor. So the judge, he goes to Ali bin Abi Talib radhiyallahu anhu, he says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, do you have any evidence? Do you have any proof? And so Ali, he laughed. Ali bin Abi Talib, he laughed. He says, actually, I don't have, Shura is correct, I don't have any proof. Like, I can't prove that this is mine. So this Christian man took his armor and he started to walk away. So because the judge ruled in the favor of the Christian. And so when he does this, he comes back. So the Christian man comes and he walks back. And he says that, as for me, I testify this is the wisdom of the prophets. Amir al-Mu'mineen himself has taken me to his judge, and his judge has ruled against him. And so what does he say? Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah. So he, at that moment, he accepts Islam. And he says that, he says, by Allah, wallahi, this armor is yours. Because I followed you after the Battle of Siffin, and your armor fell from your luggage, and I took it. So he admitted it. He said, you know, your armor fell from your luggage. I took it, and so this is yours. So Ali ibn Abi Talib responded by saying, if you have embraced Islam, this is yours. Here, take it. This is for you. So this is the type of justice that we should aspire to. Again, looking at history from a lens that we can appreciate, that then we can decipher. Because I want you to think about it. If you look at it from a secular perspective should necessitates that the more materialistic gain you can make, the better, right? Because you no longer have a moral constant. Everything becomes morally relative. You know, time, circumstances, whatever. It can continuously change. Everything becomes morally relative. And we see this day in and day out. Day in and day out. You have these people, for example, in the United States, I believe they're part of what's called the Lincoln Project. They're criticizing Trump. So all these people are Republicans that criticize Trump, never Trump campaign. You know what's interesting is that these people themselves are war criminals. So they're saying never Trump. Okay, we Republicans against Trump. We need to get Trump out of office. He's done too much. But these same people were the ones that made false pretenses to make this war in Iraq, and they exploited Iraq and given contracts to Halliburton and these government contractors, and it just decimated and killed, and just like we're talking about levels of injustice, war crimes, genocide. And now all of a sudden they're becoming media darlings. Because why? Oh, never Trump. Oh, we all hate Trump. What is this? Did you have a sense of justice, back when you were trying to wage war, bloody war on Iraq? And now all of a sudden, okay, Trump, he's hurting my bottom dollar. Maybe I have investments in China or somewhere else, and he's hurting that. So again, we should appreciate how we view history. Okay, we need to appreciate how we view history. He had a sense of loyalty. He held his word. Again, a trait that we need to bring back, that sense of loyalty. Your word means something. His word meant something. So there was a Byzantine fortress in Ulubad that surrendered to the Muslims. And so one of the terms of surrender, they said that, no Muslim should cross the drawbridge. Okay, so he kept that agreement, and he made sure that any one who would come after him would also keep that agreement. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Isra, ayah 34, and fulfill every engagement, for every engagement will be inquired on the Day of Judgment. So this encapsulated, right? This encapsulated the way that he would treat people, like the type of authenticity that he had with himself, and his devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his conquest. Like, he was a person who was truly doing things for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there was a reasoning that he was doing whatever he was doing, whether he was building his empire, his state, his community, his society. There was a driving force behind that, and that was to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Ahmed Rafiq, who's a historian, says about Uthman, he says Uthman was extremely religious, and he knew that the propagation of the message of Islam was a divine duty. He possessed a vast range of strong political thoughts. Uthman never founded his state on the love of authority, but rather for the sake of spreading Islam. That was his main driving force. Was not just for this expansion, but it was for the sake of Islam. Like, he wanted to give the message of Islam to everyone. And we should appreciate that initiative, because that's the initiative, that was the driving force which caused the Ottoman Empire, right, to have that momentum. You know, you see like a lot of movements, when it initially starts, it's very close to the purity of its ideals. What we don't understand, what we don't appreciate, is that even though materially we don't see the greatness of that empire until, you know, sometimes decades or centuries later, what we should appreciate is that those ideals were the driving force of whatever came afterwards, whatever good that came afterwards. So, for example, the purity of the ideals of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, that was the driving force of everything that came afterwards, all these benefits that came in the Muslim world afterwards. Because that's what, if we look at it, they didn't have material resources. They were lacking in having whether it was geopolitical experience or having a military or any of these different things. But it was those ideals. Like, if you look at, for example, Uthman, he's taking on an empire that's huge, that's massive, that has several nations, that's backed by well-established armies, and he was just within a generation. They were just immigrants, they were migrants running away for their lives. But look at the strength that Iman gave them. Iman gave them strength to have confidence in themselves and say, we are worth something. We have the right to believe in what we believe, and we have a right to make our mark. Because, you know, sometimes the immigrant mentality is that you feel defeated, you don't feel self-confident, there's self-esteem issues. But look at the confidence that Iman gives you when you believe in these types of ideals. So inshallah, in the next episode, we will discuss his advices that he gave to his son. And this basically forms, you could say, the constitution. This forms the ideological framework for the Ottoman Empire. And we'll see it's from this ideological framework that's what gave the Ottoman Empire its foundation, not military. These all things come afterwards, advanced military, advanced knowledge and centers. And if we look at, later on in history, or later on as we move through history, we see the advancement like in schools and hospitals and educational institutions and universities and judicial centers and all of these different things, and economy. We see all of these different things, but that didn't give it its stability. It was the framework. And the evidence for that, again, is if we recall the last podcast, is when they lost their identity, when they lost their ideological framework, it collapsed. It completely collapsed. So, inshallah, we'll continue next podcast, and we'll talk about the advices that he gave his son, Orhan, and we'll go into details of how the lessons and the deep meaning behind those advices that formed this constitution, this ideological framework for the Ottoman Empire. And thank you for tuning in. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to benefit from the lessons of history, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to look at both history and current events through an Islamic lens. We will see you all next time. Remember, we want to live by the Haqq, we die by the Haqq, and just when you think life is stuck, tune in to Life Haqq. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Do I feel that the New York police are providing enough protection, or do I have to have protection of my own? I look for protection from Allah.